And the idea was that Janet Yellen was warning about threats to the financial system coming from Donald Trump. And my point is the greatest threat to the financial system is Janet Yellen, because she's stealing U.S. Treasury securities from Russia, $300 billion worth, to use them to fund the war in Ukraine, which doesn't have popular support.
Jim Rickards, good morning to you. Before you came on the show, we were discussing earlier. You made a point here that was pretty insightful, I think. The background is that yesterday Janet Yellen gave a speech at the 2024 U.S. Treasury Market Conference in New York, and she was setting the scene, basically saying that what an underpinning of the American economy is the rule of law. And before you came on the show, you made an absolutely astounding argument to say this is the very person who's been undermining that concept to do with the rule of law in the confiscation of Russian assets. Would you like to say a bit about the conference that Janet Yellen spoke at yesterday, and perhaps give an insight as to why she, as Treasury Secretary, is talking on these themes, presumably trying to stack the debate against President Trump?
Sure. And it came down to one sentence from Janet Yellen, but when I read it, first of all, it kind of jumped off the page at me, and then it just led to a whole chain, which we'll cover very briefly. But yeah, this was an annual Treasury Capital Markets Conference. She was the keynote speaker. Her speech was about risks in the banking system and stability. That's a whole separate subject. She's saying it's very stable now. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. But the day before the speech, on Wednesday, she gave an interview to a reporter from Politico, and the reporter asked her specifically about change of government, obviously a reference to January 6, 2020, and 2021, and we could get into what's going to happen on January 6, 2025. But it was clearly a leading question about, if Donald Trump wins and he somehow, or loses, let's say, and somehow disrupts the transition of power, is that a risk to the Treasury market? So she took the bait and she said yes. And I'll read, it's a very short quote, I'll read it exactly. She said, quote, it really is essential to our having a democratic system and a democratic government, and one of the tremendous strengths of our financial system is that it is based on strong institutions and the rule of law. So that's revealing it in three different ways. Number one, this is what the White House calls an all-of-government approach. And what that means is when they have a policy issue, whether it's the climate hoax or open borders or defeat Trump, et cetera, they expect every agency and every department to get involved and pursue that goal, even if it has nothing to do with the mandate of that agency. So, for example, if you're talking about climate change, yeah, I guess the Department of Energy and EPA should weigh in on that. But the White House actually pressured the Federal Reserve to use bank regulatory powers to tell banks that they couldn't lend to oil companies. So this is what we mean by all of government. Everybody's in, and we're going to push this goal. And if you don't think it's your area, they say, try hard or find a way. So here's Yellen kind of chiming in on this whole issue of transition to power and why Donald Trump's a threat to democracy, even though that has nothing to do with the Treasury Department, number one. Number two, you want to talk about threats to the U.S. Treasury securities market? You want to talk about threats to the banking system? The biggest threat is Janet Yellen. And the reason is she's behind the theft of $300 billion of U.S. Treasury securities lawfully purchased by Russia, by the Central Bank of Russia, and put into their reserve positions. So here, despite animosities, et cetera, Russia had $600 billion of reserves, mostly earned through exports, or energy exports, et cetera. They put $300 billion of them into U.S. Treasuries, trusting the U.S. government, trusting the rule of law, and those were kept in custody in banks and a custodian called Euroclear. Yellen seized them. To be clear, froze them at the outbreak of the special military operation in Ukraine in 2022. Freezing assets is not that unusual. We kind of do it all the time. The U.S. is pretty good at it. But then she took it a step further and said, we're going to steal the assets, not just freeze them, which means, we'll work it out later, but actually take them, put them in a different name, use them to finance the war in Ukraine, because the Congress was, they did pass $60 billion a few months ago, but they made it clear that was going to be the last go-round. So that $300 billion was going to be available to finance the war in Ukraine. So what's the reaction to that? This is how the White House can't think, beyond one move. The reaction is this supercharged the effort of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now 5 other countries have joined, to create an alternative currency as a payment currency. We have a BRICS summit, the Leaders Summit. They have hundreds of meetings a year, but the Leaders Summit, so it'll involve Putin and Xi Jinping and Lula and Prime Minister Modi of India, Ramaphosa of South Africa. They're meeting in Kazan in the Russian Federation on October 21st. There's a rotating presidency. Russia happens to be president of the BRICS this year, and so Putin's going to be the host for this. They're going to advance the ball by admitting a lot of new members. And people say, you can't challenge the dollar. The dollar's too strong. I say, yeah, the dollar is king of the hill. There's no doubt about that. But the way you challenge it is anybody can print up a currency. I could print up a currency and sell it to you for dollars or whatever. But you need a large membership. When you have a large membership and they agree on a certain currency, so that if I export to you and you pay me in the currency, I don't have to spend it in your market. I can spend it in 20 other markets. That's what makes a payment currency successful. And that's exactly what the BRICS are doing. So you have this. So Janet Yellen, gets her helmet on, her beat Trump helmet on, and talks about Trump as a threat to democracy and therefore to the Treasury market. She's the greatest threat because she's stealing $300 billion of Russian assets. And the pushback is going to be to advance the creation of a new currency that will challenge the dollar. So it has profound implications for the U.S. system. By the way, this is why, one of the reasons why the price of gold is hitting all-time highs. Right now, the price of gold is at an all-time high, very close to $2,700 an ounce. Why? Because central banks around the world are looking at Yellen and her theft of Russian assets and saying, maybe I don't want so many treasuries in my reserve account. You can't get away from them completely, but at the margin, you can buy gold. So central banks, Americans don't seem to know much about gold. Americans are not lining up to buy gold, but central banks are. Beginning 2010, they've been net buyers for 14 years, and that's continuing. So she's done more to undermine the treasury market than anyone.
Jim, that was an outstanding analysis. If you could say one thing to President Trump, who will be thinking about his platform for the subsequent 4 years of his second administration, would that one thing be to do something to cement down on the rule of law in the United States, in terms to give confidence back in America, for America throughout the rest of the world?
Well, absolutely. The selection of a first-rate attorney general, clean house of the Justice Department, stop the political prosecutions, which we see almost every day. Run lawfare off the road. Lawfare was not what the law was intended to do. It was intended to resolve issues, not create new ones. But my specialty is capital markets and finance. And what I would advise the president is have the U.S. Treasury buy gold. Right, because the U.S. has the most gold of anyone in the world. We have 8,000 tons of gold. If it were announced that the U.S. government is buying gold, the price of gold would go higher. Well, who wins from that? We do, because we have the most gold. And that would increase confidence in the dollar. If you have confidence in the dollar, you're going to have confidence in the U.S. Treasury market because it's denominated in dollars. I'm not saying full-blown, 1890s gold standard. That's a topic for another day. But just add to the reserves in Fort Knox and at West Point. The U.S. will win because the price of gold will go up. And number two, you'll strengthen confidence in the U.S. dollar. That helps the U.S. That helps the rule of law. Sure. Again, the idea was that Janet Yellen is warning about threats to the financial system coming from Donald Trump. And my point is the greatest threat to the financial system is Janet Yellen, because she's stealing U.S. Treasury securities from Russia, $300 billion worth, to use them to fund the war in Ukraine, which doesn't have popular support. Beyond that, this is catalyzing the BRICS to come up with an alternative to the dollar. So she's doing more to destroy confidence in the dollar than anyone. In my policy recommendation, it's a long list, but I would say, why doesn't the Treasury buy gold? And we'll be the biggest winner because we have the most gold. We have 8,000 tons of gold. But these are the kind of things that kind of escape the White House. How people are waiting for the election to be over on November 5th. We make the point that the election is not going to be over until January 6th, 2025. That's when Democrats are going to introduce a resolution. This is the new House, not the old House, to declare Trump an insurrectionist and disqualify his electoral votes. So even if Trump wins, say, 300 electoral votes on November 5th, they could all be disqualified on January 6th, and that would put forward Kamala Harris as the president, because under the 12th Amendment, whether you like her or not, she's the only one you could vote for under the 12th Amendment, because she's the only one who has any electoral votes, even though she doesn't have 270. When no one has 270, it goes to the House, and the House would have no choice but to vote for Kamala Harris. But I'm a lawyer, among other things, and I read the 12th Amendment closely. The Republicans could foil this by standing out on the mall in the snow and denying the House a quorum. The 12th Amendment says if there's no quorum to vote for Kamala, then J.D. Vance would become acting president. So it sounds bizarre. It's all in the 12th Amendment.